They thought he was marking her as his, but the truth stood quieter than the dust in the air. The sun hung high over the town, heat pressing down on wood and bone, turning every breath dry as ash. And right there in the center of the street, Silas Reed lifted a worn silver necklace, its turquoise stone catching the light like a piece of sky, and placed it gently around Iana's neck, his hands steady, his eyes unreadable, while the town held its breath, because to them it looked like ownership, like a claim no different than cattle or land. And a murmur rolled through the watching crowd, low and sharp, but Iana did not step back, did not flinch. She only felt the weight of the pendant settle against her skin, cool despite the heat, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten, as if it carried a memory older than both of them. And for a moment her fingers rose, hovering near the stone without touching it, as though she understood something the others did not, something Silas himself had not yet seen. And when she finally spoke, her voice came soft, almost carried away by the wind. "It's too much." The words drifted between them, and a few men shifted where they stood, expecting refusal, expecting defiance, expecting her to tear the necklace away and run. But she didn't. She lifted her gaze instead, meeting Silas's eyes with a calm that felt heavier than anger. And there was no fear there, none at all, only a quiet measure, like she was weighing something far beyond the moment, far beyond the town, far beyond him. And then she finished, barely louder than before. "But I accept." The silence that followed pressed harder than the heat, stretching long enough that even the horses tied along the rail seemed to still, their leather creaking softly in the wind. And somewhere in the distance, a loose shutter knocked against wood in a slow, steady rhythm. But no one spoke, because no one understood what had just happened. Not really. Not the men who thought they had witnessed a bargain sealed. Not the women watching from shaded porches. Not even Silas, who lowered his hand. Slowly, as if unsure whether he had just taken something or given something away, and Iana stood there with the necklace resting against her collarbone, her posture unchanged, her presence untouched, like the act itself had not reduced her, had not claimed her, but had instead drawn a line no one else could see. And beyond the town, past the last fence post where the dust met the open land, shapes lingered along the ridge, still as stone, watching, waiting, their figures barely visible against the pale horizon. And though no one in the street turned to look, though no voice named what stood out there in the distance, the air carried a weight that did not belong to the town, a quiet that did not belong to silence. And Iana felt it, the same way she felt the necklace against her skin, the same way she felt the moment shift beneath her feet, because this was not the end of something. It was the beginning of a question no one here was ready to answer, and the answer would not come from words, nor from force, but from a choice that had already begun to take shape the second that silver touched her skin. Freedom is easy to offer when you think no one will take it. The words were not spoken aloud, but they lingered in the space between them, carried in the way Iana held Silas's gaze, steady and unbroken, as if she had heard something deeper than what he said. And the street seemed to narrow around that moment, the buildings leaning in with their long shadows, the heat settling heavier against the dust, and still she did not move, not forward, not back, not away from him. And the necklace rested against her skin like a quiet promise neither of them fully understood, and Silas felt the weight of his own words settle into him, because he had meant them, or at least he thought he had. Yet now that they were spoken, they did not feel like an ending. They felt like the beginning of something he had not prepared for. And Iana finally shifted, just enough to let the light catch the turquoise stone again, her fingers rising slowly, brushing the edge of it, not to remove it, not to reject it, but to acknowledge it, like one might acknowledge a memory, returning after a long silence. And when she spoke, her voice carried further this time, not loud, but clear. "You say I am free," she said, her words measured, each one placed carefully. "But you do not yet know what that means." And a murmur moved through the town again, softer now, uncertain, because this was not defiance. It was something else, something that did not fit into the simple lines they understood. And Silas felt a flicker of something shift inside him. Not anger, not frustration, but recognition. The kind that comes when a man realizes he has been looking at a thing the wrong way for longer than he cares to admit. And he did not answer right away. because for the first time in a long while, he was listening, not to her words alone, but to the space behind them, the meaning that did not need to be spoken. And Ayanna turned slightly then, not away from him, but toward the open land beyond the town, toward the ridge where the figures still stood, their presence now more certain, more real, as the light shifted and outlined them against the horizon. And though they remained distant, their stillness carried intent, not threat, not yet, but purpose, and she knew they would not wait forever, not for confusion, not for hesitation, only for truth. And she looked back to Silas, her eyes steady, and there was something softer there now, not weakness, but understanding, as if she had already seen the path he was only beginning to find. And she stepped closer, just one step, enough that the space between them changed, enough that the town noticed, and the sound of boots shifting onward followed, quiet but present, and Silas did not step back, though something in him told him this moment mattered more than any he had faced before, because it was not about control, not about decision. It was about something far more difficult to hold. And Ayanna spoke again, her voice lower now, meant for him, though the silence carried it to all who listened. "If I walk away," she said, "you will believe you did the right thing." And her fingers rested lightly against the pendant. "And if I stay, they will believe you took something that was never yours." Her eyes flicked once toward the ridge, then back to him. "But neither of those will be true." And the words settled into him like a slow weight, not sharp, not sudden, but undeniable. And Silas understood then, not completely, but enough to feel the edge of it, enough to know this was no longer about what he wanted, or what the town expected, or even what the watchers beyond the ridge might demand. It was about what was chosen, freely, without force, without claim, and that kind of choice could not be made for someone, not even with good intention. And the wind shifted again, carrying a faint sound from the distance, not loud, not clear, but enough to remind him that time was moving, that waiting would not last forever. And Ayanna stood there, calm, unhurried, as if the answer had already taken root inside her, and all that remained was whether he would understand it in time. A choice means nothing if it is shaped by fear. The words settled low in Silas's chest, not spoken, but understood. And for the first time since he stepped into that street, he did not look at Ayanna as something to protect or defend or decide for. He looked at her as someone standing on her own ground, even here, even surrounded by eyes that did not understand her. And the difference was quiet, almost invisible, but it changed everything. And the sun had begun to dip just enough to stretch the shadows longer across the boards, turning the space between them into something deeper, something that held weight. And Ayanna felt that shift the same way she felt the wind change before a storm, subtle, certain, and she lowered her hand from the necklace, letting it rest again against her skin, no longer something new, no longer something foreign, but something that had found its place. And behind them, the town stirred again, voices rising just enough to break the stillness, questions forming, assumptions returning, because people needed meaning to feel steady, needed simple answers to hold on to. But this moment refused to give them that, and Silas took a slow breath, the kind a man takes when he knows the next thing he says will not be taken back. And he glanced once toward the ridge, toward the figures who had not moved, not retreated, not advanced, only watched, and something about their patience told him, more than any threat could have, told him that what happened here would carry beyond this street, beyond this day, into something that would not be undone easily. And he turned back to Ayanna, meeting her eyes again, and this time there was no claim in his posture, no edge of ownership in his stance, only a question that had finally found its shape. "Then what does it mean?" he asked, his voice steady, quieter than before, but stronger in a way that did not rely on force. And Ayanna studied him, not his words, but the space behind them, the place where intention lives, and she saw it there, the shift, small but real, and it softened something in her expression, not enough to be seen by those watching, but enough to change the way she stood, the way she breathed. And she stepped past him then, just slightly, enough that she was no longer facing him directly, but standing beside him. Both of them turned toward the open land beyond the town, and the movement was simple, almost nothing. Yet it broke the line that had separated them before, and the town noticed, even if they did not understand. and the wind carried a faint sound again from the distance. Closer now, not loud, not urgent, but present, and Ayanna spoke, her voice calm, certain. "It means you do not speak for me," she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "And I do not run because I am told to." And the words settled into the air like dust, light but impossible to ignore, and Silas felt them land, felt the truth in them, not as something given, but something earned, and he nodded once, not to agree, not to claim understanding he did not fully have, but to accept that he was learning, and that was enough for now. And the figures on the ridge shifted again, clearer this time, their forms distinct against the fading light, and the distance between them and the town felt shorter than before, not in miles, but in meaning, and Ayanna watched them without fear, without hesitation, because she knew they were not coming for what had already been decided. They were coming to see what would be chosen next, and beside her, Silas stood still, not stepping forward, not stepping back, because for the first time, he understood that the moment did not belong to him to move, and the town, caught between what they expected and what they were witnessing, fell quiet again, waiting, even if they did not know for what, and the answer, when it came, would not belong to them either. The land always knows before the people do. The thought moved through the air like the first breath of evening, and the light had softened now, turning the edges of the town gold and long, stretching every shadow until it touched something else, and out beyond the last fence, the figures on the ridge began to move, not fast, not in a rush, but with the steady certainty of men who had already decided to come, and the distance between them and the town closed inch by inch, hoof by hoof, though no sound reached yet, only the sense of it, like a storm scene far off before it is heard. And Ayanna watched without blinking, her posture unchanged, her hands resting loosely at her sides, while the turquoise stone at her throat caught the fading sun and held it there, quiet and bright. And beside her, Silas felt the shift deepen, felt the moment stretch into something that would not be undone by a single word or a simple gesture, and behind them, the town could no longer pretend not to see. Heads turned, voices dropped, and a few men stepped back from the street as if distance alone might keep them clear of what was coming. But no one left, no one walked away, because something in the air held them there, something larger than curiosity, larger than fear, and Silas did not move either, though every instinct he had built over years told him to prepare, to act, to control what could be controlled. But this was not that kind of moment, and he knew it now, knew it the same way he knew the weight of a storm before it broke. And Ayanna took a slow breath, the kind that settles into the bones, and when she spoke, her voice carried only to him, though it seemed to reach further. "They will not ask," she said, her eyes still on the horizon. "They will only watch." And Silas nodded once, because he understood that much, understood that whatever came next would not be taken, it would be seen, measured, remembered, and that made it heavier than anything he could face with a steady hand or a quick draw. And the riders came closer now, their shapes clearer, their movement deliberate, no rush, no threat, just presence. And the town grew quieter still, the kind of quiet that settles when people realize they are no longer the center of what is happening. And Silas felt something loosen in his chest, not relief, but a release of the need to hold the moment in place, and he turned his head, slightly toward Ayanna, not to lead, not to follow, but to stand with, and she felt it, the absence of pressure, the absence of claim, and it changed the space between them more than any word could have, and she stepped forward then, not away from him, not toward the town, but toward the open space between, where the dust lay undisturbed and the light fell clean, and the necklace moved softly against her collarbone with each step. No longer a question, no longer a symbol to be explained, but something she carried by choice, and the riders slowed as they neared, their horses easing into stillness at the edge of the street, their presence filling the space without a sound, and no one spoke, not the town, not the men on horseback, not even the wind. And in that silence, Ayanna stopped, standing alone between two worlds that watched her, one behind, one before, and Silas remained where he was, not stepping forward to stand beside her, not stepping back to distance himself, because he understood now that this line was hers to cross or not, and nothing he did would change what it meant. And the air held, waiting, and Ayanna lifted her chin just slightly, her eyes steady as she faced what had come for her, not as something to be taken, not as something to be returned, but as someone who would answer only for herself. And the moment balanced there, quiet, fragile, and absolute, as if the entire land had paused to see what she would choose next. Some truths do not arrive with words. They arrive with who is willing to stand still. The riders did not dismount. Not yet. Their horses quiet beneath them, breath slow, leather creaking softly in the cooling air, and the man at the front, older than the others, sat straight in the saddle with a stillness that carried more weight than any command, his eyes fixed on Ayanna, not with anger, not with urgency, but with something deeper, something that measured without needing to ask. And Ayanna met that gaze without lowering her own, her chin steady, the turquoise at her throat catching the last edge of sunlight. And for a long moment, nothing happened, no one spoke, no one moved. And yet everything shifted, because this was not a meeting of force. It was a meeting of understanding, and the town behind her felt it without knowing why. Their voices gone now, their presence reduced to watching, uncertain and small against something they could not name. And Silas stood where he was, his hands loose at his sides, his weight balanced, not ready to act, not ready to retreat, simply present. And he watched the man on the horse, watched the way his eyes never left Ayanna. And he understood then that whatever passed between them did not need language, did not need explanation. It was already known, and Ayanna took one step forward, not toward them, not away from them, but into the space where choice lives, and the dust shifted under her boots, a small sound that carried further than it should have, and the man on the horse tilted his head just slightly, a movement so small most would miss it, but Ayanna did not, and neither did Silas. And that was enough to tell them both that the moment had changed, that something unseen had been acknowledged. And Ayanna spoke then, her voice calm, clear, not raised, but certain. "I came here by my own steps," she said, not to explain, not to defend, but to state what already was. And the man on the horse listened, his expression unchanged, but his stillness deepened, as if the words had settled exactly where they needed to. And Ayanna continued, her eyes never leaving his, "And I will leave, or stay, the same way." And the words fell into the space between them, simple, complete, needing nothing more. And for a moment longer, the man said nothing, did nothing. And then, slowly, he exhaled, a breath that seemed to carry the weight of the distance between them, and his hand lifted, not toward a weapon, not toward command, but open, palm resting lightly against his chest, a gesture of acknowledgment, of something older than the town behind her, older than the lines drawn across this land. And the riders behind him did not move, did not speak. They simply held their place, as if the decision had already been made the moment she spoke. And Silas felt it then, the release of something he had not known he was holding, a tension that had been built from years of believing every moment required his action, his decision, his control. And now, standing there, he understood that this one did not, that this one belonged to her entirely. And he did not step forward, did not try to stand beside her, because he knew that would change the meaning of what was happening. And Ayanna felt that too, felt the absence of interference, the quiet respect in his stillness. And it settled into her like a steady ground beneath her feet. And the man on the horse lowered his hand, his gaze still on her. And though no words followed, the message was clear enough for those who understood how to see it, that she was not being taken, not being returned, but being witnessed in her choice. And the light faded another degree, the sky shifting toward the deep tones of evening. And the moment held, not fragile now, but firm, as if it had found its place. And Ayanna stood there, between two worlds that no longer pulled at her, because she was not standing between them at all. She was standing within her own. Respect is the only thing that cannot be taken, only recognized. The evening settled deeper across the town, shadows stretching long and quiet. And the air felt different now, no longer tight with uncertainty, but heavy with something steadier, something earned. And the riders remained where they were, their presence no longer pressing forward, no longer demanding, but simply there, as if the moment itself had reached its answer without needing another word. And Ayanna stood unmoving, her shoulders relaxed, her breath even, the turquoise pendant resting against her chest like it had always belonged there, not as a mark, not as a claim, but as something chosen. And the man on the horse watched her for a long second more, his gaze steady. Then slowly he turned his head, just slightly, toward the others behind him, a movement so small it might have been missed by those who did not understand its meaning. But the riders did, and one by one, without a word, they eased their horses back, not retreating in haste, not leaving in defeat, but stepping away with the same quiet certainty they had arrived with, and the distance between them and the town began to grow again, not as a break, but as a release. And Ayanna watched them go, her expression unchanged, because this was not loss, this was not separation, this was acknowledgment. And when the last of them turned with the fading light, disappearing beyond the ridge, the land seemed to breathe again, a slow, steady exhale that moved through dust and wood and skin alike. And behind her, the town stirred, not loudly, not boldly, but in low voices, uncertain, trying to fit what they had seen into something they could understand, but failing, because there was no simple shape for it, no clear story to tell. And Silas stood where he had been, his eyes following the ridge until the last figure was gone, and only then did he shift, just slightly, the weight of the moment settling into him in a way that would not leave quickly. And he looked at Ayanna, not as someone he had taken in, not as someone he had to protect, but as someone who had stood her ground in a way he had not fully known how to do until now. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, because there was nothing left that needed saying, not yet, and the quiet between them was no longer heavy, no longer uncertain. It was clear, like open land after a storm has passed. And Ayanna finally turned, not toward the town, not toward the ridge, but toward him, her gaze steady. And there was something different there now, not distance, not challenge, but a quiet recognition, as if she had seen what she needed to see. And she reached up, her fingers brushing the edge of the pendant once more. And this time there was no hesitation, no question, only acceptance, not of him, not of the town, but of her own choice. And Silas understood that without asking, understood it in the way a man understands something that cannot be explained, only felt. And he gave a small nod, not as permission, not as agreement, but as acknowledgment. And the town watched, still trying to decide what had happened, still searching for a story that made sense. But the truth had already passed them by, quiet as the wind, steady as the land itself, and it did not belong to them to hold. The hardest thing a man can do is nothing, when everything in him wants to act. The last light of day stretched thin across the emptying street, turning the dust into a soft glow that clung to boots and boards, and the town began to breathe again, not with relief, but with confusion, voices rising in low murmurs that never quite reached full volume, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever had just settled over the place. And Silas remained still for a moment longer, his eyes no longer on the ridge, but on the ground between where Ayanna had stood and where he stood. Now, that narrow strip of dirt that had held more weight than any boundary he had ever known. And slowly, he stepped forward, not to close distance, not to claim space, but simply to move as a man who no longer needed to hold himself back. And Ayanna watched him without turning fully, her posture relaxed, her attention no longer divided between two worlds, because the choice had already been made, and it did not require repetition. And when Silas stopped beside her, not ahead, not behind, the space between them felt different again, no longer a question, no longer a test, but something quieter, something steady. And he spoke then, his voice low, meant only for her, though the stillness carried it further. "I did not know what that necklace meant," he said, not as an excuse, not as a defense, but as a truth offered without weight. And Ayanna tilted her head slightly, her gaze softening just enough to show she heard him fully, and she answered without hesitation, "It was not meant for you to know." Her words calm, unburdened, and that answer did not sting, did not close anything. Instead it opened something he had not expected, a space where not knowing was allowed, where learning did not come with shame. And Silas let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, though there was no humor in it, only recognition, and he nodded once, accepting that truth the way a man accepts the weather, something larger than himself, something that does not need to be controlled to be understood, and the town watched them, still trying to gather what remained of the moment. But their understanding stayed shallow, tied to what they had seen, not what had passed beneath it. And Ayanna turned then, finally facing him fully, her eyes clear, steady, and she studied him for a long second, not judging, not testing, simply seeing, and whatever she saw there seemed to settle something inside her, because she reached up once more, her fingers resting briefly on the turquoise stone, and then she let her hand fall, leaving it where it belonged, not as a symbol of him, not as a tie to the town, but as something that had found its place through her own choice. And she stepped forward again, this time not into the space between, but toward the far end of the street, away from the center, away from where all eyes had gathered. And Silas did not stop her, did not ask where she was going, because he understood now that the direction mattered less than the decision. And after a moment, he followed, not close, not distant, simply present. And the two of them moved through the town in a quiet line, side by side but not bound, their steps steady, unhurried. And behind them, the voices grew again, louder now, trying to shape what had happened into something that could be told, something that could be owned. But the truth did not stay there. It moved with them, out of the center, out of the story the town wanted to keep, and into something else entirely, something that would not be explained in words, only remembered in the way a man stands still when it matters, and the way a woman chooses without asking permission. Out here, nothing belongs to you unless it chooses to stay. The town fell behind them one quiet step at a time, the sound of boots on wood fading into dirt, then into the open stretch where the land widened and the air felt different, cleaner somehow, as if it carried fewer expectations, and the last of the voices drifted away with the evening wind, leaving only the steady rhythm of two sets of footsteps moving side by side without urgency, without need to speak. And the sky had turned deep gold now, sliding slowly toward dusk, the kind of light that does not last but leaves something behind when it goes. And Ayanna walked with her gaze forward, not searching, not hesitating, the pendant resting still against her chest, no longer catching the light, but holding it in a quieter way. And Silas kept pace beside her, not watching her every move, not measuring the distance between them, because he understood now that distance was not something you closed by stepping closer. It was something you honored by standing where you were meant to stand. And for a while, neither of them spoke, the silence not empty, but full, like a pause that does not need filling. And the land stretched ahead, open and patient, as if it had seen this before, as if it knew how these moments unfold long before the people inside them ever do. And finally, Ayanna slowed, not stopping completely, just enough to shift the rhythm, and Silas matched it without thinking, the two of them coming to stand near a low rise where the town could still be seen behind them, small now, distant, its edges softened by the falling light. And she turned then, not fully, just enough to look back once, her eyes resting on the place where everything had happened, where voices had risen and fallen, where choices had been misunderstood. And she held that gaze for a moment longer than necessary, not out of regret, not out of doubt, but out of acknowledgment, because even a place that does not understand you can still be part of your path. And then she looked forward again, letting that piece of the past settle behind her without needing to carry it further. And Silas watched her do it, watched the quiet certainty in the way she moved, and he realized something that had not been clear before, something that did not arrive as a thought, but as a feeling that settled deep and steady, that nothing he had done had brought her here, and nothing he could do would keep her if she chose otherwise. And that truth did not diminish him. It did not leave him empty. It left him clearer, like a man who has finally stopped trying to hold water in his hands and instead lets it run as it will. And he spoke then, not because he needed an answer, but because the moment asked for honesty. "If you walk away," he said quietly, his voice even, "I will not follow." And the words carried no weight of expectation, no hidden request. They simply